Another massive breaking story overnight. The Southport massacre has now been turned by the MSM into a story about the quote-unquote far right. So I'll take you through what happened. Yesterday, we of course learned that there are 3 young victims of this knife man, the 17-year-old knife man who has not been named. He may not be named, but we know while he was born in Cardiff, his parents are from Rwanda. This knife man stabbed 11 young girls at a Taylor Swift dance class. 3 died. The victims, 6-year-old BB King, 7-year-old Elsie Sancombe, and 9-year-old Alice Aguirre. Utterly heartbreaking, and a story that you would think would dominate the headlines for a long time. But there are serious questions that need to be asked about this man. Why did he commit this crime? And there have been lots of rumours that the information has been fed to us in some sort of nudge style. So we're not being told all the truth because they want to manage our emotions about what is a crime so deplorable that we simply cannot accept this type of thing happening anymore. So yesterday afternoon, the leader of Reform UK, the new MP for Clacton, Nigel Farage, released this video.
I know the Prime Minister went to lay flowers and was heckled, and it shows you how unhappy the public are with the state of law and order in our country. I have to say there are 1 or 2 questions. Was this guy being monitored by the security services? Some reports say he was, others less sure. The police say it's a non-terror incident, just as they said the stabbing of an Army Lieutenant Colonel in uniform on the streets of Kent the other day was a non-terror incident. I just wonder whether the truth is being withheld from us. I don't know the answer to that, but I think it is a fair and legitimate question. What I do know is something is going horribly wrong in our once beautiful country.
Now, I can't see anything wrong with what Nigel said there. Surely any politician or any journalist should be wanting those questions answered, given we have to know what caused that sort of terror on the streets of Southport. But last night, there were tensions on the street. We saw that earlier in the day. I showed you the clip yesterday. Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, being heckled by furious locals who wanted to know how many more children would die. And then police apprehended this man who was apparently, and this has not been confirmed because we do not have the information from the police, but who was apparently carrying a machete.
Maybe.
Now, of course, the corrupt and dishonest mainstream media haven't reported the connection between that event and the indefensible violence against police, which then continued in Southport. Watch. Now, I need to be very clear on this. I understand the anger about what happened in Southport. You saw how much I felt it yesterday. But the anger, as I said in my digest yesterday, has to be harnessed responsibly. That is not responsible. And I am consistent when it comes to the police in this country. They do not always get things right. But at Manchester Airport, I believe they did. And it was so quick that the leftists and the mainstream media turned on them. So I will stand by the police in terms of their behaviour, both in Manchester and certainly in this case where they were very brave, the first responders dealing with the knife men. But what I cannot defend is the tone and the language from the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper. And I'm going to show you here what Yvette Cooper said about the Muslim mob causing rampages in Rochdale compared to how she spoke about the mob on the streets of Southport last night. You will note the very clear difference in language and tone. Watch this.
Well, I've been talking to West Yorkshire police officers and also local community leaders about the action they're now taking in response to those unacceptable scenes of disorder and criminality that we saw last night. The community is working very closely together in response to what was a local child protection incident. But it's really important that the community can feel safe on the streets and also that the perpetrators feel the full force of the law.
Short time ago.
So appalling to now see those same police facing violent attacks from thugs on the streets who have no respect for a grieving community. It's a total disgrace. Frankly, this is a time when everyone should be showing respect for a community and for the police.
So let me bring Alan Miller and Alex Story, my superstar panel, back in now. And Alan, what feels very clear to me here is that the mainstream media and the political establishment are glad about what happened last night because it's the perfect distraction for them. They no longer have to talk about the stabbing of 11 girls at a Taylor Swift dance class because it's so much easier to be able to dismiss the far right as being responsible for all of the ills on the streets of Southport.
Yeah, I think it's very, very concerning that this country needs a very imminent, really serious, open and honest discussion about the issues we face. We need to have a conversation about what's been going on with Hendon Police College, training police officers. We need to have a discussion about chief inspectors who are different to the guys on the front line, who often are put their own personnel into situations where they give them mixed messages, where they do not feel that they are supported and they have to constantly do things in a different fashion with different groups. The obsession with DEI, with diversity, equality and inclusion and what that means on the street. And also a situation where politicians are constantly presenting things in a certain way. And you've got the police often on the ground that put in very difficult circumstances that have to go in. And we've seen this in a lot of instances in the last couple of weeks. It's ongoing and it becomes very difficult for them. It's why so many people are leaving. They don't have enough resources. They feel that the public don't support them. The police should be there for the public and the public for the police. And we've got a real issue that many in the public feel that, and I happen to agree with them at this juncture. There's a two-tier style of policing that's going on, that some of the demonstrations and protests where, for instance, actual terror prescribed organizations, people are waving their flags, people are chanting all sorts of things, people are vandalizing and damaging things, they get treated in one way. They're not coming down full force. We don't hear this kind of rhetoric. Whereas others who may not be doing any of those things, and certainly not prescribed terrorist organizations, and are conducting themselves calmly, are often treated in a very different way. And people are recognizing this. A lot of people are discussing it. And I think that what we've seen, both with the Home Office with Yvette Cooper, and also, let's be honest, our Prime Minister went up there and did not address the crowd. They were really, it seemed to me, they really wanted to hear some words from the Prime Minister, and he kind of scuffled off. And I think that was a real mistake. But also, when Yvette Cooper chooses to describe one set of incidents in one way as a kind of community-based project, and then talks about thugs and the kind of visceral language that she uses there, so they've all been shipped in. We know a lot of the mainstream media were saying it was the EDL. They haven't existed for 10 years. It's this kind of trying to present the whole discussion a certain way. Meanwhile, this absolutely terrible tragedy and travesty has happened where daughters have been killed. And I'm not surprised it's a febrile situation. I was impressed, Dan, by how dignified and composed everyone was earlier in the evening. Obviously, I don't know the circumstances. We haven't been released. We've seen that someone allegedly had a knife, and it was only 100 yards or so from the vigil. You know, that kind of situation is incendiary. Who is that person? What are they doing? These are all questions we don't know at the moment.
Yeah.
But even the policing of them and the way that's done and the engagement with them, a lot of people in Britain now, Dan, feel like they are being treated with contempt and disdain. They're either referred to as kind of gammon or kind of neo-Nazis, their grandparents that fought the actual Nazis. This whole idea that if you ask questions about borders or about migration or about
you're
lockdown,
racist, you're Islamophobic, you're transphobic.
Exactly. Rather than having, and this is what we really need, Dan, we need a really serious grown-up discussion in Britain with everyone engaged, where we can thrash out these issues, talk about them openly and honestly, because some people will try and leverage all this from different points of view. And those that, I mean, I certainly at Together, the reason we call Together is that we think that we all have a much more common purpose together, that we as fellow citizens have a lot in common with one another. We have an ability to get back to sort of decent values of democracy, freedom, liberty and rights. And we may disagree about the role of the state and in the economy and everything, but ultimately we're fellow citizens. And this situation has the risk of really being even further exacerbated when people feel like they're constantly treated with disdain and contempt. And we need to get this back on track. And that means journalists taking themselves seriously, talking to people honestly and openly and objectively. That means elected representatives.
Well, I agree.
Also not treating the public with contempt.
I agree, but the problem is, Alex Story, that doesn't happen because you see immediately a straw man argument being made today. The far right is now the problem. And look, the far right is now used to describe so many sorts of people. Probably all three of us at certain points have been described as the far right. It's almost becoming a meaningless term. But that's what the mainstream media has been dominated by today, Alex. Not about how on earth 11 young girls were stabbed at a Taylor Swift dance class. And that's the problem I have. Also, Alex, if you look at Tommy Robinson, who is obviously the figure that the establishment most fear and want to shut down, he was very clear on X last night to his followers: do not throw bricks, do not engage in violence. There was certainly no encouraging of the criminal behaviour that went on in Southport, which we should all condemn.
Yeah, so the interesting thing about the Tommy Robinson story is that he was arrested the day after having organized his, I suppose, from his perspective, very successful march. He was arrested under the Terrorism Act, which is odd. I spoke to lawyers about why that might be, and they said they have no idea. It's completely the wrong act to have arrested Tommy Robinson with. Now, the fact that he's been released unconditionally with unconditional bail is another story. But the interesting thing was that the police tweeted, "Yes, you read it right. We arrested Tommy Robinson the day after the march." And I think on this in Southport, what we have is quite the opposite. We have a blanket ban on trying to find out information, at least about the motive. Now, we've been told by an organization we don't trust that the chap is 17 years old. He could be 18, but given that officially he's 17, the law stops newspapers and organizations from releasing his name. But what they could have done is at least release the motive, giving people a sense that at least some of the truth could come out so that they could make sense of this tragedy. And this is the problem of the double standards we've been bumping our heads against since the beginning of the show. There are double standards. And I think the reason for this is because the state requires a growing population for growing GDP, otherwise it goes bankrupt. The reason we have to understand that there will never be an honest discussion about immigration is because the people of Britain are no longer reproducing. We are also covered with regulation, including the Climate Change Act from 2008, that has completely asphyxiated business in Britain, which essentially means that the FTSE in 2007 at its height, was nearly at the same level as it is today. There's been no growth on the corporate sector since 2008. And if you include inflation into that, actually what you see is that Britain has impoverished itself massively. So in order to keep the books balanced, Britain needs more population. And the only way to get the GDP numbers up so that we don't go bankrupt is through population growth, because there'll not be productivity growth because of regulation. And that means open borders is the only way to keep our civil servants paid with money, with currency that has any value. That's the reason why there will never be an honest discussion about immigration. And the collateral damage is worth the price of all those people who work in the civil service, whose pay is determined by GDP growth numbers. That's it. And that's the thing that we've got to face.
Indeed it is. Now, I just want to show you one more thing. A couple of weeks ago, Andrew Marr, another one of those journalists who we were told was impartial when he was the main presenter on the BBC for years and years and years of politics, although has since admitted, since he's gone to the private sector, that actually he's as hard left as they come. But you remember, a few weeks ago, he went on Question Time and predicted that Labour was going to usher in this utopia under slippery Starmer. Watch this.
Well, a couple of sources of optimism, because I completely agree with the questionnaire. We have to be optimistic looking forward. I think just having a stable government that will be there for 5, maybe 10 years, who knows, but with sort of ordinary, down-to-earth, serious people talking like the rest of us in charge of the government, and a plan that doesn't shift very much for investment, is going to mean a wall of money coming into this country from around the world. You look at the chaos going on the continent, particularly in France. You look at the chaos likely ahead in the United States. And suddenly, for once, for the first time in many of our lives, actually Britain looks like a little haven of peace and stability. And that...
Look at what has happened since Labour has come to power. Alan, you've had riots in Hare Hills, issues with the police. You've had Bangladeshis take over police stations in East London. I mean, I could go on and on and on. This is not going to be utopia under Labour, is it?
You know what's so astonishing about that speech is the way Andrew talks about people that are serious and who talk like the rest of us. They talk like him, and they're a very small group of people that are basically now intertwined. And I must say that it's very little to differentiate most of them. They've all attended Russell University's, many Oxbridge. They have no relationship with the public, with the demos of any real meaning. They treat us often with disdain and contempt because they're not actually held accountable and responsible. There's a huge gap between them and us. Labour, the very name Labour, they no longer have an association with it. They're rudderless. And instead of taking on board all of these new ideological kind of, people call them woke, but identitarian positions that are not about the real concerns of everyday people, but they've been hoisted upon us. And the idea, and this is to refer to what Alex was saying, which was very interesting, the idea that now is going to usher in a new period, a bit like he's hoping like the Blair Cameron period economically, it seems like that's what he means, is preposterous. We've got an enormous issue with productivity, with sluggish growth. We need to address that issue, and not by bringing lots more people in for cheap labour, but by actually reinvesting, by allowing zombie companies to fail, by having a 50-year plan for infrastructure, by being honest with the public and getting the public engaged in a manifesto and in an outlook and an orientation. Whilst we let companies fail and let people lose jobs, we do retraining. At the moment, 5 million people are not working in Britain. We have to address the issue of benefits versus low wages. None of this is really being taken on board. And the idea that this is a serious new lot of sensible people, I just think that reflects the bubble that Andrew's in, unfortunately.
Yeah. Very good point. Alan Miller, co-founder of the Together Declaration, and the Conservative commentator, Alex Story. Alex, you get back to your holiday now. I'm very sorry to have disturbed it, but what a brilliant superstar panel. The best analysis that you certainly don't get in the mainstream media. Now, Father Calvin Robinson is coming up. We're going to have much more on the Southport story, plus what went on in Southend last night. What on earth is happening to lawless Britain? Father Calvin Robinson up in just 1 minute. But, you know, I've promised on this show to only talk to you about products that are actually life-changing. This one is a little bit more personal. But the fellas watching, you're going to completely get it. And I have to tell you, ladies, this is the best possible treat for your husband or boyfriend, because it really is a game changer. So you know us men want our grooming routine to be a one and done deal. Well, the days of using the same trimmer for your face and your privates are over, thanks to our friends at the brilliant Manscaped. They've come up with the ultimate package to keep your hairs trimmed from 12 to 6. Introducing the Beard and Balls bundle, featuring the Lawnmower 5.0 and the Beard Hedger. And despite what it sounds like, I'm not actually talking about a real lawnmower, like that sort of lawnmower, but this is a lawnmower that will trim your sensitive areas and actually get them as manicured as fresh cut grass. So this trimmer gets right the first time. It's gentle on the skin in all of the right places, and with 2 interchangeable skin-safe blade heads, you can choose between a precise trim or a smooth finish. And did I mention it's waterproof? You can trim in the shower and avoid making a mess everywhere. Perfect for those of us who appreciate efficiency. Next, I want to tell you about the Beard Hedge. Now, this is great whether you're going for a neat stubble. I think I've got a neat stubble look today, actually, or a full-on lumberjack. The trimmer has you covered because it has 20 length options, meaning you can achieve any style with a titanium-coated stainless steel T-blade. Just like the lawnmower, the Beard Hedger is also waterproof, so you can handle your beard grooming right in the sink or shower without worrying about water damage. And with up to 60 minutes of runtime and an LED charge indicator, you'll never be caught mid-trim with a dead battery. I love this product. I use it all the time. It will keep you very happy, and if you're looking for a treat for your boyfriend or husband, it will keep them very happy too. And the great news is, I've got a proper offer for you today. 20% off and free shipping. You just have to use the code Outspoken at manscaped.com. No more juggling multiple tools or dealing with subpar results, just efficient, effective grooming wherever you need it. I'm going to put the link in our YouTube description, but I'll repeat it again. Manscaped.com. Use the code Outspoken when you check out. For the premium grooming experience, trust Manscaped. But now, back to the show. And it's time for today's Outsider, Father Calvin Robinson. Father Calvin, what a day of news. And we're going to be covering it all with you now, but also in our uncancelled after show as well. But let's start with Southport, Calvin, because what do you make of the fact that the mainstream media and political establishment seemingly have embraced the fact that they no longer have to talk about 11 young girls being stabbed on Monday because they are obsessed with the so-called far-right protesters?
It's very convenient, isn't it, Dan? Alice, Elsie and Bibi are at the back of the mainstream media's minds now because they can talk about something else. They can distract us with division further. Yes, there was some problems yesterday in Southport. But of course, other than that, there were vigils, there were prayers, there were people giving memories and talking about the families that they'd known and loved. And these 3 girls, but not only these 3 girls, there are of course 5 others still majorly injured, and we're praying for their full recovery too. But of course, the mainstream media and the politicians want to keep talking about any trouble they see. And this is why anyone that's going to Southport to support the families and support the community has to make sure they go there peacefully. We should be angry. Absolutely, we should be angry. We should be in righteous indignation at the horror that has taken part there. But we cannot meet that anger with violence. The moment we submit to violence, we become slaves to that sin. And of course, we distract everyone from Alice, BB, and Elsie, and the other girls. And so we've got to bring it back to truth, goodness, and beauty. We've got to bring it back to prayer. We've got to bring it back to helping that community, because this community, from next week onwards, they're going to be left behind as other incidents happen and other news stories come up. So we've got to make sure that they're taken care of and they're prayed for and they're looked after.
Yeah, and actually it's frustrating because we need to have a national conversation about why this violence is happening on the streets of the UK, why our children are not safe at a Taylor Swift dance class. And I do not shy away from the discussion that I had with Lawrence Fox on Monday, or my digest yesterday, where I spoke about the failure of assimilation, the failure of multiculturalism. But the problem is, Calvin, that's an intellectual discussion, and the protests last night, which turned violent, just mean you've given the mainstream media what they want: diversion. They do not want to talk about the fundamental issues.
No, and even when they do talk about it, they play distraction techniques then. So they'll say, well, actually, the perpetrator was British because he was born here, and actually he was raised there from 6 years old or whatever. Avoiding the fact that this was not an Anglo-Saxon Brit, this was not a white Brit, this was someone who was recently brought into this country or born in this country, it doesn't matter, but not from this country. And that's the conversation we need to be having. Why is it that there are so many communities that are not integrating? There are so many people that are not assimilating. And when they're not, this multicultural bubble keeps exploding and people are getting hurt. We have to decide what kind of nation we want to be. If we are going to take people in from other places, should we look at what values they come with? There are many Christians who are being persecuted in southern Sudan, northern Nigeria, Artsakh, China even. If we want to help people who are genuine refugees, perhaps they're places to start, rather than looking at communities that hate us, hate our way of life, and want to do us harm.
Yes, although I should stress, Calvin, because this guy is 17 years old, we actually still don't know what his religious beliefs are, although the police do seem to be briefing the BBC that he has no connection to Islam. But look, I want to see that for myself. I want to know. I want to know for certain.
They're not going to tell us about him. What they'll keep doing is they'll talk about the protests, or they'll talk about any trouble that pops up. And when they're not talking about that, they may even talk about those poor girls, and they'll talk about their families and their lives. They'll do anything to avoid talking about the perpetrators. We need to know who these people are, where they came from, and what motivated them. So often these attacks in the public, they hide the motivations. We never get the manifestos. We never get the reasons. And it's actually dangerous because we don't know who the people are that want to kill us.
Totally. But the problem is, Calvin, it wasn't just in Southport where there was trouble last night. I want to show you some of this footage from Southend, which should be the archetypal British English summer destination, totally safe for families, but in an indication of the sort of law and order crisis, the loss of control happening up and down the country. Look at what happened on the streets of Southend last night. And Calvin, that had been sparked by quite an astonishing machete fight, which we can take a look at now, Calvin. So, Calvin, you've got the backdrop of the quintessential British fairground playing host to the sort of machete violence that we just shouldn't be seeing on the streets of the UK.
And I mourn for the loss of our country. I really do. This is so sad to see. This is something you'd expect to see in the third world, but people keep saying import the third world, become the third world. We're seeing it played out in action. I'm sure I counted 4 police officers. I think there were police officers in that video on the periphery. What were they doing? Of course, they're scared. They're afraid. Of course, they're afraid. They should be afraid, but they should be trained to deal with these situations and to take these people off the streets. We're seeing machetes as increasingly in these situations. And actually, it doesn't matter what sparks this situation. Much like, was it just over a week ago in Leeds, when apparently a Romani gypsy child was taken off the family by the social services and the Mohammedan community started rioting, or in Whitechapel in London when someone was arrested by police in Bangladesh, and so black Bangladeshis in London started rioting. It actually doesn't matter what's sparking, igniting these troubles. These troubles are increasing across the country because people are unhappy. There is a growing civil unrest. This country is not a safe place anymore because people don't feel at home. There's divisiveness everywhere. There's different communities, hostile ends of, Southport and Southend, opposite ends of the country. What is going on?
Thank you so much for watching Dan Wootton Outspoken. Please do subscribe if you want lots more clips and interviews like that. Plus, if you want to watch our totally uncensored after show, then visit www.outspoken.live.